I once thought that silence meant peace, but the silence I lived in wasn't peaceful. It was the kind that wears you down, day by day, until you can't take it anymore. You don't notice it until the day it ignites everything. They laughed at me, in my own house, over a dinner I paid for, with candles I lit, in a kitchen I painted with my own hands. And when my daughter-in-law called me the help, they laughed louder, even my son. That night, something in me changed. I stopped fading into the background. I started fighting back, in my own way. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I just handed her the keys and walked out. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I was done being invisible. And what I found after walking away, it wasn't just freedom. It was the truth. The kind that sits quietly in old journals, in dusty rooms, and in the face of someone you never knew you were missing. This isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about finally seeing things for what they are. And if you've ever felt like you didn't matter in your own home, then this story is yours too. I didn't plan to be at that dinner. Olivia told me it was a private night with her parents. No need to cook, no need to join. Just a quiet evening for them. But by mid-afternoon I was already scrubbing dishes, setting the table, feeding the cat, and making sure the wine was perfectly chilled. She hadn't asked. She didn't need to. That's how things had been for a while. In Olivia's mind, I was always on standby. Not as her husband's mother, not even as a guest. Just someone who kept things in order behind the scenes. And Ethan? He never questioned it. Never told her to stop treating me like the help. He just let it happen. Again and again. When Olivia's mother asked, "Who's that?" She knew who I was, but asking was part of the game, to test how I'd be introduced. Olivia played her role without hesitation. That's Diane, like our live-in helper. Keeps things from falling apart. They laughed. Ethan laughed too. That laugh told me everything. It wasn't surprise, it wasn't discomfort, it was agreement. My son, who I raised alone, who I sacrificed for, laughed at the idea of me being their maid. That moment didn't shock me. It confirmed what I had refused to see. Ethan had changed, or maybe he had revealed who he'd been all along. Someone who found it easier to align with his wife than defend his mother. Someone who wanted peace in his home, even if it meant erasing me. I didn't cry. I didn't confront. I simply walked away. Because what would confrontation do? They wouldn't understand. They'd say I was overreacting. Emotional, sensitive. The usual words used to discredit women who ask to be seen. I sat in my room and thought about all the little ways I had disappeared over the years. The missed birthdays, the quiet holidays, the text messages left on read. Every small dismissal layered until I became something less than family, just convenient support. I thought about Ethan's silence every time Olivia spoke over me. His passivity, his comfort in letting her take control while I shrunk into the walls of the home I once paid for. That night, I realized something brutal. Olivia didn't steal Ethan from me. He gave himself away, willingly, eagerly, and I had enabled it. I taught him I would always be there, no matter how I was treated. I made excuses for him, called it stress, work, growing pains. But deep down, I knew better. I just didn't want to face it, until now. That dinner wasn't a breaking point. It was the moment I finally admitted the truth. They didn't see me. Not as a mother, not as a person. And without recognition, there can be no relationship. So I made a decision. Not out of anger, but clarity. If they needed a maid, they could hire one. I would no longer be filling that role. I was done waiting for them to notice I was unhappy. Done hoping Ethan would remember who raised him. They had made their choice. Now it was time I made mine. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. Out of habit, I brewed a pot of coffee, not because I wanted any, but because I always did. It was muscle memory. Care for others first, then maybe yourself if there's time. But that morning, I stood in front of the sink holding my mug and realized I didn't want to do it anymore. I looked around the kitchen, the countertops I had scrubbed clean 100 times, the cabinets I picked out 10 years ago, the bar stools I bought so Ethan would have somewhere to do his homework while I cooked dinner. Every inch of that kitchen held pieces of me, my choices, my labor, my love. And yet, none of it felt like mine anymore. I heard Olivia before I saw her. Her footsteps, light and quick, coming down the stairs like she was the queen of some house she inherited by birthright. She breezed in, phone in one hand, eyebrows already furrowed from whatever Instagram comment she was analyzing. No, Good morning. No, thank you for the breakfast I had left on the counter. She didn't even look at me. Then Ethan came down. Same routine. Grunted some half-formed syllable in my direction, poured himself a cup of coffee, and disappeared into his laptop. To him, I was background noise. A permanent fixture in his life that required no maintenance, no acknowledgement. That was the moment I stopped waiting for them to remember who I was. I had spent years building that home, not just with money, but with memory. I had raised Ethan within those walls, painted over heartbreaks, celebrated small victories, cried quietly in the garage so he wouldn't see. And now I was a ghost in my own story. And what haunted me most wasn't how Olivia treated me. It was that Ethan let her. Every insult, every passive-aggressive dig, every choice to exclude me, he allowed it, enabled it. And worse, he normalized it. That was the betrayal. I thought about all the times I had defended him to friends, to coworkers, even to myself. He's just busy. He's tired. He's figuring things out. No, he wasn't too busy to laugh at me in front of Olivia's parents. He wasn't too tired to let me become their unpaid housekeeper. He had made a choice, and now I was making mine. I waited until Olivia was in the middle of her morning routine, stretching in the living room, filming herself doing yoga while barely holding the poses. I walked in and placed a set of keys on the coffee table. She glanced at them, confused. "What's this?" "The keys to the house," I said. "You'll need them. You're going to be managing it on your own now?" She blinked as if the sentence didn't compute. Ethan walked in seconds later. "What's going on?" I looked at him for a long time, not with anger, with finality. "You'll figure it out." Then I picked up my purse, the same one I carried the day I brought him home from the hospital, and walked out. No screaming, no drama, just silence. The kind of silence that isn't empty, it's earned. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't leaving out of guilt. I was leaving with clarity. They had taken my presence for granted. Now they could learn what my absence really meant. I didn't look back when I left the house. No dramatic scene, no packed suitcases. Just my purse, the coat I wore when I first brought Ethan home from the hospital, and the keys I left behind on the table. That silence, the moment the door clicked shut behind me, was louder than any fight we could have had. I drove with no music on, just the sound of my own breathing. My hands on the wheel were steady, too steady for someone who just walked away from a life. But that was the thing. I hadn't walked away from life. I had walked away from the illusion of it. Aunt Caroline's apartment sat at the end of a quiet block, the kind of building that had seen better decades. She left it to me in her will, a just in case that none of us ever talked about. She didn't have children, she barely spoke to Ethan. But she saw me, maybe not often, but clearly enough to know I'd need something one day. I unlocked the door. The apartment smelled like time, dust, old wood, and the lingering scent of something floral. The wallpaper peeled in places, the carpet was faded, and the radiator clanked like it was haunted. But it was mine. Not just legally, spiritually. That first night I didn't sleep much. I sat on the couch with a blanket around my shoulders and stared at nothing. No one asked for help. No one rolled their eyes. No one sighed in passive-aggressive judgment. For the first time in years, I was alone. And strangely, I wasn't afraid. I made coffee the next morning out of habit. The machine sputtered like it hadn't been used in years, but it worked. I sat at the tiny kitchen table, cradling the mug with both hands, staring out the window. The silence felt heavy, but not punishing. It felt earned. Ethan didn't call. Olivia didn't text. Not a word. I checked my phone a few times the first day. Then I stopped. Because deep down, I already knew. They weren't looking for me. They were adjusting to life without me just fine. And for once, I wasn't going to be the one reaching out. The first few days passed like a fog. I walked from room to room, not doing much. Just existing. I found an old photo album tucked behind a dresser. Pictures from when I was in college before Ethan. Before any of this. I looked so alive, like a woman with plans. A woman with direction. I hadn't seen her in decades. I started writing. Just scribbles at first, fragments. Thoughts that had nowhere to land before. I found an old notebook Caroline had used for recipes. I flipped it over and started filling the back pages with my own memories, the kind I never shared with anyone, not even Ethan. Especially not Ethan. Each night I added a little more to the story of myself. I wrote about the long nights working 2 jobs, the meals I skipped so Ethan wouldn't have to, the birthdays I spent alone while he celebrated with Olivia's family, not out of self-pity, out of need, to remember I had mattered, even if no one else seemed to think so. By the end of the first week, I ventured outside. There was a small bookstore 2 blocks down. I had passed it before but never stepped inside. This time I did. It smelled like dust and paper and fresh coffee. A young woman behind the counter smiled and said, "Take your time. We don't rush healing here." I didn't ask what she meant. I just nodded. I picked up a novel I hadn't read in years. One of the few that made me cry. Not from sadness, but from recognition. I bought it with cash. No discount, no apology. It was the first thing I'd bought for myself in months. That night, I made dinner. Not for anyone else. For me. A pasta dish I used to love before Olivia went gluten-free and made me feel guilty for eating carbs. I lit a candle, not to impress anyone, just because I wanted to. I started rearranging furniture, scrubbed the baseboards, picked up a cheap rug from a thrift store to cover the stained linoleum. I wasn't fixing the apartment. I was claiming it. Making it reflect who I was now. Not the maid. Not the mother. Just a woman. I didn't miss the house. I missed what I thought it represented. Family, connection, legacy. But those things hadn't lived there in years. The people inside had stopped seeing me a long time ago. In that silence, I began to hear myself again. I didn't know exactly who I was becoming, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid to find out. And that, more than anything, felt like home. A week after I moved into the apartment, I received a key. It came in a plain envelope, no return address. But I recognized the handwriting. Slanted, sharp, precise. Lorraine. Lorraine had been my mother's best friend, an artist, and in some strange way, a mirror of the life I never lived. She passed away years ago, but apparently left something for me, a key to her old studio tucked away on Ashbury Street, a place I hadn't been to in over 2 decades. I didn't intend to go. I thought, what could possibly be there for me now? But the thought stayed, like a soft knock at the back of my mind. And one morning, I found myself standing in front of the old iron door, paint chipped, number plate rusted. I turned the key. The air hit me first, that unmistakable mix of turpentine, aged wood, and dried pigment. The walls were yellowed, the corners layered in dust. And yet, nothing had changed. It was as if time paused here the day Lorraine died. The studio was small, just one big room with high ceilings and a single wide window that faced east. A cracked stool sat in the corner, canvases leaned against the walls like forgotten thoughts, and the light, my God, the light. It poured in like forgiveness. I hadn't realized how much of myself I left here. Before Ethan, before marriage, before I shrank myself into the role of mother and nothing else. I used to come here every Sunday. Lorraine would smoke hand-rolled cigarettes and talk about art, life, freedom. She wasn't gentle. She believed in wounds, in letting them bleed onto canvas. I was always more cautious, more structured. But I admired her. She was wild. And she saw me, really saw me, in a way no one else did. Once I brought baby Ethan here. He couldn't have been more than 6 months old. Lorraine held him like she held brushes, delicately, but with intent. You can still be someone, she said that day, even if you're somebody's mother. Back then, I didn't understand how heavy that sentence would become. Now, standing in that room, I felt like I was stepping into a past version of myself, one I'd buried so deep I forgot she ever existed. In a drawer beneath the workbench, I found a wooden box labeled with my name. Inside, a photo of Lorraine and my mother laughing in the sun, paint on their hands. A dried flower, an old tube of crimson oil paint still soft in the middle, and a letter. Diane, if you're reading this, it means life brought you back here. I hope it wasn't for pain. But if it was, then I hope this place can remind you, you were someone before the world asked you to forget. You've always had more fire than you let on. I saw it. In your questions, in your art, in your restlessness. Don't let anyone, not even your children, make you invisible. This studio is yours now. Use it, or don't. But know this. You are not lost, just waiting to be remembered. I sat on the floor and cried, not because I was sad, but because I had gone so long without hearing my own name spoken with love. Without being reminded that I was more than useful, I was real. That afternoon I cleaned. I opened the windows, swept the floors, wiped the dust off old sketches. I didn't want to change it, I just wanted to wake it up. I hung a blank canvas on the wall. I didn't paint. Not yet. I just stood and stared, letting my hands remember the weight of creation, the ache of possibility. In the days that followed, I returned often. Sometimes I brought coffee, sometimes just a notebook. I didn't need to do anything, just be there. And every time I stepped inside, I remembered a little more. The way it felt to be 22 and full of questions. The smell of turpentine on my fingertips. The sound of Lorraine's laugh when she told me, "Your fear is just your talent waiting for permission." This studio became my sanctuary. Not a home, not a job, not a duty. A place where I didn't owe anyone anything. I didn't talk to Ethan. I didn't check Olivia's social media. I stopped caring how they were coping without me, because I was finally beginning to understand how to cope without them. One afternoon, I found an unfinished painting Lorraine had started, just outlines of a woman's face, the eyes detailed but empty. I propped it on the easel, stared at it for nearly an hour, then I picked up a brush. My hands shook, but I painted. Not to finish it, just to connect. Color bled into color, the eyes gained shadows, the lines softened. And slowly, so slowly, the woman in the painting began to resemble someone I hadn't seen in years. Me, not the mother, not the wife, not the woman left behind, just Diane. I walked out that evening with paint under my nails and a steadiness in my spine I hadn't felt since my 20s. The studio didn't give me answers. It gave me permission to exist, to feel, to become. And that, more than anything, was the beginning of everything that came next. After spending time at the studio, I began to feel more like myself again. I wasn't completely okay, not yet, but I was calmer. Life slowed down. I made coffee in the mornings. I walked to the park. Sometimes I just sat and thought. I didn't feel healed. I just felt still. Then, one afternoon, I went looking for a spare light bulb in the storage closet upstairs. I hadn't unpacked everything since moving into the apartment. Most of the boxes were untouched. In the back, half covered by an old blanket, was a rusty metal trunk. It was Aunt Ruth's. I dragged it into the living room. It creaked when I opened it. Inside were bits and pieces of her life, faded towels, postcards, knitting needles. But underneath them, wrapped in a plain envelope, was a stack of papers tied with ribbon. My name was written on the front. I opened it. The first page was a hospital record, but it didn't have my name. It said, Michael Jameson. The next few pages were medical records, a birth certificate, and a black and white photo of a newborn baby. Tucked inside was a letter from Ruth. Diane, if you're reading this, it means life brought you to the truth. I wanted to tell you earlier, but I didn't have the heart. I worked the night shift at the hospital when you gave birth. Something felt off that night. Last-minute room changes, mislabeled tags. I wasn't sure. I hoped I was wrong. But years later, I found a legal document. The hospital quietly settled with another family. Their name was Jameson. I'm so sorry, Diane. I believe your baby was switched. My hands were shaking. I read the letter 3 times. Then I just sat there, staring at the photo. It wasn't Ethan. The boy I raised wasn't my biological son. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I just felt like the ground had shifted under me, but not in a scary way. In a way that made things finally make sense. For years, I blamed myself for how distant Ethan was. I thought I had failed, but maybe it wasn't me. Maybe, deep down, he had always felt like I was a stranger. Maybe that's why he could laugh while I was being disrespected in my own home. Why he never stood up for me. I sat there for hours thinking. And then, without knowing what I expected, I opened my laptop and typed, Michael Jameson, bookstore. It didn't take long. There it was, Jameson's Books. A small, cozy-looking store just a few miles away. There were photos on the website, and one of them made my heart stop. It was him. Dark hair, clear eyes, kind smile. He was helping a customer, holding a stack of books. He looked nothing like Ethan. But somehow, he looked like me. I stared at the screen, unsure what to feel. Joy? Grief? Anger? I didn't feel any of that. I felt curious. The next morning I went there. I didn't go inside. I stood across the street with a coffee in my hand and watched. Michael was organizing books on a shelf. He greeted everyone who walked in. He smiled easily, talked gently. I came back the next day. And the day after that, I wasn't stalking him. I didn't even know what I wanted. I just needed to see him. He had grown up just a few miles from me. All those years, all that time we lost. It broke my heart, but at the same time it filled it. Because there he was, a good man, a kind man, my son. I didn't know if I would ever tell him. I didn't know if I should. But I kept going back. I sat on a bench nearby. I brought a notebook pretending to write. Sometimes I just watched him through the window. Every time he smiled at someone, it felt like a piece of me was smiling too. He didn't know me, but I knew him. And for now, that was enough. While I watched Michael from a distance, a different story was unraveling across town, one I used to be at the center of. The house I left behind, the people I once called family, they were starting to feel the cracks I had quietly left behind. It began with the mortgage. They didn't know the house was still in my name. Ethan had never bothered to transfer it. Maybe he thought I'd live there forever, quietly cooking and cleaning until the end. Maybe he assumed I wouldn't care. But I had cared enough to protect myself. I had never signed it away. When I left, Olivia tried to refinance. She was denied. That denial triggered a series of small failures, unpaid bills, frozen credit cards, late notices. I hadn't planned any of this. I wasn't seeking revenge. But the truth has a way of working itself into the cracks. I kept my distance. I didn't answer Ethan's calls. I ignored Olivia's emails. I wanted them to sit with the silence, the same silence I had lived in for years. Meanwhile, I began keeping a journal again. But not like before. This wasn't about my feelings. This was about facts. I made notes about the house, its legal status. I searched public records, checked property taxes. Everything was still under my name. Every payment I had made, every improvement I had funded. It was all there in black and white. And then I found something else. Olivia's business. Olivia Ascends, she called it. A personal development brand. Coaching, lifestyle advice, yoga classes. Her social media was filled with perfectly edited videos, soft lighting, motivational captions. But behind the scenes, it was falling apart. Her clients were fake. Her testimonials were bought. The office space was rented for photo shoots. Her income was unstable. And her debt? Enormous. They were pretending. Playing house in a place they couldn't afford, using credit cards to cover appearances. And it was all starting to collapse. I watched it quietly. Not with glee, but with a strange kind of peace. I wasn't the maid anymore. I wasn't the one fixing everything while they smiled for the world. I was just watching. Then came the first real sign of panic. Ethan sent a text, short. "Mom, are you okay?" After weeks of silence, that was all he said. I didn't reply. A few days later, Olivia called. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail. "Margaret, we need to talk. Ethan says you're going through something and we want to support you. But the mortgage, this is serious." It made me laugh. Now it was serious? When I was scrubbing floors, it wasn't serious. When I was being called a maid in my own house, it wasn't serious. Now it was. 2 days later, Ethan showed up at my apartment. I saw him through the peephole. He looked tired, thin, lost. I didn't open the door. He knocked once, then again. "Mom," he said softly, "please don't do this." I stood on the other side, hand on the knob, heart steady. But I didn't open it. Not because I hated him, but because I finally loved myself enough to let him feel what it was like to be ignored. The next day, I met with a lawyer, a woman my age, sharp and kind. "I want to sell the house," I told her. She nodded. "Do you have documentation?" I handed her everything. Mortgage papers, tax receipts, photos of repairs I'd paid for. She glanced through it all and said, "You'll get the full amount. They can't claim ownership without proof of contribution." Olivia tried to fight it, of course, claimed she had added value. My lawyer smiled. "Let's see her prove that in court." She couldn't. The house went on the market. Interest came fast. It was in a good neighborhood. Within a week, we had a buyer. When the notice was sent to Ethan and Olivia, my phone rang nonstop. I didn't pick up. I sat in a small cafe the morning it became official. tea in hand, peace in my chest. They were finally feeling the consequences of their choices, not because I punished them, but because I stopped saving them. And as I looked out the window, I realized something. I wasn't angry, I wasn't hurt, I was free. After the house went on the market, I felt like I could finally breathe. I had been holding my breath for so many years, waiting for peace, for respect, for recognition, and when it never came, I blamed myself. But now, I understood something deeply important. The people I gave everything to had never truly seen me, and they never would. Michael, on the other hand, saw me. Even though he didn't know who I really was yet, he saw me. I kept visiting the bookstore. At first, it was every few days. Then, it became routine. I'd go in, browse, buy a novel or two. Michael would smile, ask about my reading, recommend something new. We talked about simple things, books, weather, coffee, but underneath those conversations, something quiet was growing. One afternoon, he asked, "What do you do for work?" I paused. I used to work in healthcare, but these days, I'm just trying to find myself again. He nodded. That's fair. I think we all go through that. I did too. I asked, "Why books?" He smiled. They were always there, even when people weren't. That answer sat with me for days. I started writing again, not just in notebooks. I bought a secondhand laptop and typed everything I remembered. About the switch at the hospital, Ruth's letter, Ethan's distance, Olivia's cruelty. I didn't know if it was a memoir or a confession. Maybe it was just a long overdue letter to myself. And then, one quiet Thursday, I decided it was time. Michael was in the back of the shop, restocking. I walked up, book in hand. He looked up and smiled. "You always find the good ones." I hesitated. "I came to talk." His expression shifted. "Sure, let's go to the back." We sat in the tiny break room. The kettle whistled in the corner. I held the envelope in my hands, the one with Ruth's letter, the hospital documents, the DNA test. "I've been coming here for a reason," I said. "I figured," he replied, calm. I placed the envelope on the table. "This is going to sound unbelievable," I warned. He waited. 30-some years ago, at the hospital, there was a mistake. 2 babies were switched. He leaned forward slightly. "One of those babies was mine. The other was you." Silence. I pushed the envelope toward him. "Everything is in here. My Aunt Ruth worked at the hospital. She saw things. Years later, she found the truth." He didn't touch the envelope at first, just looked at me. "And Ethan?" he asked. "I raised him, but he's not my biological son." Michael nodded slowly. Then he picked up the envelope, opened it, read every page. When he finished, he didn't speak, just closed the folder and sat still. "I'm not here to take anything from you," I said. I needed you to know." His voice was quiet. "I believe you." I blinked. "You do?" "Yes. I don't know why, but I do. It feels strange, but not wrong." We sat in silence for a long time. Then he asked, "Why now?" "Because I couldn't carry it alone anymore." He nodded again. "What do we do now?" I smiled sadly. "Whatever you want. I'll follow your lead." He stood and paced for a minute, then turned to me. "I don't know if I can call you Mom. I'm not asking you to. But maybe we can start with coffee?" I laughed. "That sounds perfect." We didn't talk about the files again that afternoon. Instead, we talked about favorite authors, about childhood memories, about how he always thought he looked different from his parents. And as we spoke, I felt something shift. This wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. Weeks passed. Michael and I continued meeting. It started with coffee, then long walks through the local farmers market, shared books, inside jokes. We didn't call it anything. It wasn't mother and son. It wasn't friendship. It was something else. A bridge slowly being built across years we never had. I didn't tell him about Ethan. Not yet. Not the full story. But he knew there was pain. He saw it in my silence. And Ethan? He was unraveling. The house sale had gone through. The money was wired to my account. Olivia's business had collapsed after I mailed the evidence to her parents. Anonymous, of course. They pulled their support. Her fake coaching empire crumbled. She tried to save face with vague Instagram posts about betrayal and growth, but the comments told another story. People were catching on. Ethan texted again. "Can we meet?" I agreed. One last time. We met at a park bench. No memories, no ties. He looked thinner, older, like life had finally caught up to him. "I did a DNA test," he said. "It matched the paperwork." I nodded. "I know." "I'm sorry," he added, "for everything, for laughing at you, for letting her speak to you like that, for disappearing." I didn't respond immediately. "I thought I was being a good husband," he continued. "I didn't realize I was being a bad son." "You weren't a son," I said softly. "You were someone I loved, someone I raised. But love only grows where it's watered, and you stopped showing up." He bowed his head. "I deserve that." I sighed. "You don't owe me guilt, but I don't owe you a place in my life either." "Then why meet?" he asked. "To say goodbye." He flinched. "You still have a chance to become someone better, but I won't be the one waiting for that transformation. I've waited long enough." Silence stretched between us. "I met the other family," he said. "Michael's parents. They're different." I didn't ask how. I didn't want to compare. There was no winner in this story. He looked up at me. "Do you love him?" "I don't know him yet," I said honestly, "but I'm learning to." He nodded. "That's good." Then, almost in a whisper, "Can I call you sometimes?" I shook my head gently. "Not now, maybe someday, but not now." He stood, wiped his palms on his jeans. "Goodbye, Mom. Goodbye, Ethan." He walked away, shoulders heavy, and I felt light. Later that week, I returned to the bookstore. Michael was rearranging shelves. "Hey," he smiled. "You're just in time. I need a second opinion." We spent an hour moving books around, debating which classics deserved eye level. As we finished, he said, "I've been thinking about starting a reading group. Community stories. People sharing their lives." "That sounds perfect," I said. He hesitated, then added, "I was hoping you'd help me run it." My heart caught. "You're sure?" He nodded. "No one tells stories like you." And that was it. No dramatic reunion, no tearful declarations, just an invitation, a space, a beginning. That night, I boxed up the last of the photos from my old life. I didn't throw them away, but I didn't need them on the walls anymore. I was building something new. I opened my laptop and typed the final line of my manuscript. Sometimes the most radical thing a woman can do is stop waiting to be chosen and choose herself. And that's what I did. Not because of revenge, not because of pain, but because I was finally ready to begin. I walked past the bookstore 3 times before I dared to step inside again. Michael stood behind the counter, reorganizing a stack of poetry books. His hair was a little longer than I remembered. His glasses perched low on his nose. He looked up and gave me that same kind, curious smile. "Back again?" I nodded. Couldn't stay away. We talked for 10 minutes about nothing. The weather, the price of coffee, how fall had come too fast this year. But my heart pounded the entire time. I didn't tell him that I now knew who he was. I couldn't. Not yet. Instead, I bought a book on memoir writing and left. That night, I sat by the studio window and stared at the city lights. The letter from Ruth was tucked into the back of my journal, the sketchbook that was now half filled with pieces of a truth I wasn't sure I had the right to claim. I kept visiting the bookstore. Sometimes I'd buy something. Other times, I'd just browse and chat. Michael started to recognize me. He'd ask what I was reading, what I thought of the last book I bought, and I listened when he spoke. His cadence, his insights, his gentleness. So much of it felt familiar. One rainy Thursday, I asked if he wanted to grab coffee. He smiled and said yes. We sat in a little cafe next door, steam rising from our mugs. "You seem like someone who notices things," he said. "I do." "You remind me of someone," he said, then paused. "I don't know who." I swallowed hard. "Maybe a reflection." He laughed. "Maybe." That night I cried again, but not from grief, from longing, from knowing that this, whatever it was, could never go back in time. I had missed birthdays, school plays, scraped knees. I had missed everything, but I was here now. So I started writing. Really writing. I documented every moment I remembered from Ethan's childhood. Not to shame him, but to remind myself that love, even when misplaced, is still love. And I wrote about Michael, the way his voice settled people, the way he looked at the world, the echoes of what could have been. Then I hired a lawyer. Not for revenge, but for truth. I had the house. I had the documents. Ethan and Olivia were living on borrowed time in borrowed walls, paid for with years of my sacrifice, and they thought I was gone. But I was more present than ever. The lawyer smiled after our first meeting. "You have every legal right," she said. "Let's remind them." I didn't tell Ethan or Olivia right away. I let the silence grow, the same silence they had once given me. I let it stretch until it was louder than any confrontation. Then the notice went out. A formal letter. Simple. Direct. The house would be sold. The title was in my name. The mortgage had defaulted months ago. I would reclaim what was mine. The next day, Ethan called. I let it ring. Then Olivia. Voicemail. Then came the email. "What are you doing? Please talk to us. We didn't know you felt this way." But they did know. They just didn't care. I passed by the house once. Olivia was on the porch, talking on her phone, glass of wine in hand. Ethan sat inside, still, probably playing video games, unaware that his world was shifting. The eviction wasn't dramatic. It was methodical, quiet, like me. A few days later, I told Michael the truth. We were in the bookstore. He had just helped a customer find a rare biography. I asked if we could talk in the back. His face tensed. "Everything okay?" "No," I said, "but it will be." We sat across from each other. I handed him the envelope Ruth left me. "I think you should read this." He opened it slowly. His face changed as he read. Eyes scanning the documents, the letter, the hospital records, silence. "This can't be real." "It is." He set the papers down gently. "So you're saying?" "I'm saying I gave birth to you, and I never knew." He stared at me. His hands shook. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything." "But why now?" "Because silence is a kind of lie, and I don't want to lie to you." He looked away toward the shelves. "My parents, they're good people. I'm not here to take you from them. I just wanted you to know the truth, that's all." We sat in the quiet for what felt like hours. Then he whispered, "So what now?" I smiled gently. "Now? We see what happens next. No expectations, just possibility." He nodded. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. But something passed between us, a beginning. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt like the next chapter might not be written in loneliness, but in choice, in truth. And maybe, if we both had the courage, in love. The first time I stood in front of the bookstore microphone, my hands were shaking. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was weight, the weight of years spent invisible, now being asked to speak. Michael had arranged everything. Flyers pinned around town, folding chairs set up in the back room, tea, cookies, soft jazz in the background. He said I didn't have to read if I didn't want to. Just show up, sit in, be part of the circle. But I wanted more than a chair. I wanted to use my voice. So I stood. The room was warm, the lighting soft. A dozen faces, familiar and kind, looked back at me. Michael sat at the edge, silent, supportive. I opened my journal. The pages were worn, the ink smudged in places, but my words were there. My truth. And I read. I read about silence, about motherhood, about the day I handed over the keys and walked away from a house that never saw me. No one interrupted, no one rushed me. Some nodded, others blinked tears. One woman in the back whispered, "Yes," like she knew. When I finished, the room was still. Then applause, not loud, but full. And I felt something crack open. It wasn't applause for a performance. It was recognition, affirmation. Afterwards, strangers approached. One woman hugged me. Another said, "You told my story without even knowing me." I didn't know what to say, but I felt lighter. That night, I sat by the window upstairs, watching the town below, My journal rested beside me. For the first time, I wasn't writing out of grief. I was writing forward. The next reading night, I brought a printed essay. Clean margins, typed text. It was about the sketchbook I found and how memory tricks us, how we rewrite pain to make it bearable. More people came. The chairs filled up quicker. A young girl, barely 20, read a poem about leaving a broken home. An older man shared a story about losing his wife and learning to cook alone. It wasn't therapy, it was connection. Story by story, voice by voice, the bookstore became more than shelves and paper. It became a space of becoming. And I was becoming someone too. I no longer avoided mirrors. I no longer flinched when people asked, "What do you do?" "I write," I'd say. "I help run a bookstore." Sometimes I even smiled when I said it. Michael and I never forced anything. We walked, talked, drank tea, argued about books. He called me Diane. I called him Michael. We let the truth sit gently between us, not as a burden, but a bridge. Once he asked if I wanted to submit my writing to a local journal. I wouldn't know where to start. He shrugged. "Start by sending it. That's what writers do." So I did. And 3 weeks later, I got an email. "We'd love to publish your piece." I sat at my desk, staring at the screen. Then I laughed. Not out of pride, but disbelief. Because not long ago, I was a ghost. And now, my name was going to be in print. Ethan texted once, just once. He said, "I read your piece. I don't know what to say, but I see you now. I'm sorry." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. He saw me. That was enough. One quiet Thursday afternoon, a woman walked into the bookstore. Short gray hair, bright scarf, eyes like questions. "You're Diane, right?" she asked. "I am." "My name's Karen. I read your story. My daughter sent it to me. I just wanted to say, thank you." She squeezed my hand. Her eyes were damp. "I left a man who never saw me," she said. "I didn't think anyone would understand." "I do," I said, and I meant it. Because stories aren't just meant to be read. They're meant to echo. The bookstore's back wall now holds a new sign. Voices Unbound, monthly readings with Diane. Every seat fills, every month more stories. And every month I speak, not for validation, but for liberation. The story that once buried me had become the story that freed me. And in speaking it aloud, I didn't just reclaim my voice. I gave others permission to find theirs. The first time I stood in front of the bookstore microphone, my hands were shaking. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was weight, the weight of years spent invisible, now being asked to speak. Michael had arranged everything. Flyers pinned around town, folding chairs set up in the back room, tea, cookies, soft jazz in the background. He said I didn't have to read if I didn't want to. Just show up, sit in, be part of the circle. But I wanted more than a chair. I wanted to use my voice. So I stood. The room was warm, the lighting soft. A dozen faces, familiar and kind, looked back at me. Michael sat at the edge, silent, supportive. I opened my journal. The pages were worn, the ink smudged in places, but my words were there. My truth. And I read. I read about silence, about motherhood, about the day I handed over the keys and walked away from a house that never saw me. No one interrupted, no one rushed me. Some nodded, others blinked tears. One woman in the back whispered, "Yes," like she knew. When I finished, the room was still. Then applause, not loud, but full. And I felt something crack open. It wasn't applause for a performance. It was recognition, affirmation. Afterwards, strangers approached. One woman hugged me. Another said, "You told my story without even knowing me." I didn't know what to say, but I felt lighter. That night, I sat by the window upstairs, watching the town below. My journal rested beside me. For the first time, I wasn't writing out of grief. I was writing forward. The next reading night, I brought a printed essay. Clean margins, typed text. It was about the sketchbook I found and how memory tricks us, how we rewrite pain to make it bearable. More people came. The chairs filled up quicker. A young girl, barely 20, read a poem about leaving a broken home. An older man shared a story about losing his wife and learning to cook alone. It wasn't therapy, it was connection. Story by story, voice by voice, The bookstore became more than shelves and paper. It became a space of becoming. And I was becoming someone too. I no longer avoided mirrors. I no longer flinched when people asked, "What do you do?" "I write," I'd say. "I help run a bookstore." Sometimes I even smiled when I said it. Michael and I never forced anything. We walked, talked, drank tea, argued about books. He called me Diane. I called him Michael. We let the truth sit gently between us, not as a burden, but a bridge. Once he asked if I wanted to submit my writing to a local journal. I wouldn't know where to start. He shrugged. "Start by sending it. That's what writers do." So I did. And 3 weeks later, I got an email. "We'd love to publish your piece." I sat at my desk, staring at the screen. Then I laughed. Not out of pride, but disbelief. Because not long ago, I was a ghost. And now, my name was going to be in print. Ethan texted once, just once. He said, "I read your piece. I don't know what to say, but I see you now. I'm sorry." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. He saw me. That was enough. One quiet Thursday afternoon, a woman walked into the bookstore. Short gray hair, bright scarf, eyes like questions. "You're Diane, right?" she asked. "I am." "My name's Karen. I read your story. My daughter sent it to me. I just wanted to say, thank you." She squeezed my hand. Her eyes were damp. "I left a man who never saw me," she said. "I didn't think anyone would understand." "I do," I said, and I meant it. Because stories aren't just meant to be read. They're meant to echo. The bookstore's back wall now holds a new sign. Voices Unbound, monthly readings with Diane. Every seat fills, every month more stories. And every month I speak, not for validation, but for liberation. The story that once buried me had become the story that freed me. And in speaking it aloud, I didn't just reclaim my voice. I gave others permission to find theirs. It was an ordinary Tuesday. Rain tapped gently on the bookstore windows, and the air inside smelled like cinnamon tea and new paper. I was restocking a shelf of used poetry books, humming a tune I didn't know the name of, when Michael walked in with a paper bag and a nervous smile. "Lunch," he said, holding up the bag. "And maybe a question?" I raised an eyebrow, curious. He sat at the little table in the corner we had started calling our office. 2 mismatched chairs, a chipped mug always full of pens, and a bulletin board pinned with bookstore events and hand-drawn doodles. "I've been thinking about something," he said slowly, unpacking sandwiches. "Something small, but kind of big." I waited. He cleared his throat. "You've never asked me to call you anything different." The room stilled. I looked at him. Really looked. He wasn't fidgeting. He wasn't backing away. He was offering something tentatively, like an unopened gift. "No," I said gently, "because I never wanted to take anything from you. You have a mother. I didn't want to confuse that." He nodded. "You didn't take anything. You gave." The sandwich in my hands suddenly felt heavier. "I've called you Diane all this time," he continued, but I realized, you're more than that to me now. I just didn't know when it would feel right. I swallowed hard. "And today?" I asked. He smiled, eyes glassy. "Today, it feels right." He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Hi, Mom," he said. The word hit me like sunlight. Not because I needed it, but because it was his to give. Tears welled in my eyes. I didn't speak. I just held his hand tighter. That afternoon, we closed the store early. Not because of any emergency, just because we wanted to. We walked in the drizzle, shared stories neither of us had told before. He asked what my favorite childhood book was. I asked what his mother used to pack in his lunchbox. We laughed about peanut butter sandwiches and bad school photos. He told me he used to pretend to be a detective, snooping around the neighborhood with a notebook. I told him I used to paint my emotions when I didn't have the words. By the time we circled back to the store, the rain had stopped. The clouds parted just enough to let in a soft gold light. He unlocked the door. I stepped inside, and for the first time the space felt different. Not like his store where I helped, but our space, shared, chosen. That night, I opened my journal and wrote, "He called me Mom today." Not because he had to, because he wanted to, and in that moment, every version of me, from the woman who scrubbed floors, unnoticed, to the one who reads aloud to strangers, was held. Seen. Loved. It wasn't a replacement, it was an expansion, a new branch on an old tree. And for the first time in a long time, I felt fully rooted, fully home, even in a place I hadn't built, with a son I didn't raise. Because healing doesn't come when we return to what broke us. It comes when we're invited into something new. And that day, with one word, he invited me in. And I said yes. The day Ethan stopped by the store, I knew something had shifted, not in the world, but in me. He didn't announce his arrival, just stepped in quietly, hands in the pockets of a worn jacket, eyes scanning the room like he wasn't sure what he was looking for. Michael wasn't there. It was my solo shift that afternoon. A strange coincidence, or maybe a small mercy. I was behind the counter labeling new arrivals. When I saw him, I didn't freeze. I didn't flinch. I simply said, "Hi." He nodded. "Hey." Silence settled between us, not awkward, not tense, just heavy, like a bag we both knew we had carried for far too long. "I read more of your writing," he said. "Not just the one in the journal, some of the others online." I waited. "They were hard to read." "I imagine they would be," I said. He stepped closer, careful. "I didn't come here to argue or explain, just to talk." I gestured to the reading nook by the window. "Then let's sit." We did. The same corner where Michael and I had shared tea, ideas, even silence. Now, here I was again, across from the boy I raised, the man I no longer recognized as mine. He looked older than the last time I saw him, not just tired, smaller somehow, like life had peeled away the armor he used to wear so confidently. "I've been thinking," he started, "about everything, about you, about how I saw you." "And didn't see me," I added. He nodded slowly. "Yeah, that too." He ran a hand through his hair. "I used to think love meant loyalty, standing by Olivia no matter what. But I get it now. Loyalty without respect, it's not love. It's fear, or laziness." I didn't respond. Some truths don't need commentary. "I keep asking myself," he continued, "oh no, why I didn't defend you, why I laughed when she called you the maid. And I think, maybe part of me believed it. Not that you were the maid, but that you'd always be there. Always." He looked at me, and for once he didn't look away. "I took you for granted." "You did," I said. "And now I don't even know where we go from here." I took a breath. "Maybe we don't go anywhere. Maybe we just sit here for a bit and tell the truth." He nodded. "Okay, here's the truth. I loved you. I still do. But I didn't know how to show it. I let someone else's voice become louder than mine, and louder than yours." "My turn?" I asked gently. He nodded. "The truth is, I loved you with everything I had, but sometimes love doesn't make it enough, especially when it becomes one-sided." He wiped at his eyes quickly, like he didn't want me to see, but I saw. I always saw. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I know," I said. We sat there, two people bound by time, but no longer by trust. And yet there was no hatred, just a mutual understanding that something had broken long ago, and we had both let it. After a while, he asked, "Do you ever wish you never found out? About Michael?" I thought about that. The studio, the sketchbook, the DNA report, the way truth had rearranged my entire life. "No," I said, "because Michael didn't replace you. He reminded me that I was still capable of being seen, of being chosen." Ethan swallowed. "I guess that's what hurts. Knowing someone else sees you now, and I never did." "That's not your burden anymore," I said. "It was never yours to carry, but it also wasn't mine to bury." He stood to go. "Thank you for letting me talk." "Thank you for coming." As he walked to the door, he paused. "You don't owe me anything. I know that. But if you ever want to meet for coffee or something, just to talk, I'd like that." "I'll think about it," I said. And I meant it. Because forgiveness isn't always a doorway. Sometimes it's a window cracked open, just enough to let in air. When he left, I returned to the counter and resumed my work. My hands steady, my breath calm. Later that evening, Michael returned. "How was the day?" "Quiet," I said, smiling softly. "But full." He didn't ask for more. He just handed me a cup of tea and we sat on the floor, sorting books into piles. We didn't need to fill the silence with words. The quiet between us had never felt empty. That night, I wrote in my journal, "Some things were never mine to begin with. A son, a house, a role I molded myself into for survival. But what I've found now, my voice, my space, my peace, those are mine. Not because they were given, but because I finally chose them. And that choice, above all else, is what made me free." There was a morning, not long ago, when I woke before the sun. The apartment was quiet, the kind of stillness that used to feel lonely, but this time it felt like possibility. I brewed a small pot of coffee, wrapped myself in the old cardigan Lorraine once gave me, and stepped out onto the tiny balcony. The sky was just beginning to shift, deep navy softening into violet, into a warm blush of dawn. And I stood there, not as someone's mother, not as a woman wronged or forgotten, but as Diane, just Diane, whole, not healed all the way, not finished, but standing, rising. The bookstore had become a heartbeat in my life. I wasn't just part of it, I shaped it, curated the monthly readings, repainted the back walls, stocked the shelves with books written by women who, like me, once believed their stories didn't matter. Michael added a new shelf last week. "For your picks," he said. I asked, "My picks?" He nodded. "What you believe people need to read." It was a small gesture, but for someone who spent years being told what to cook, when to clean, where to sit, it felt monumental. Some days I still think of Ethan, not with anger, not even with pain, just with distance. I don't check his social media, I don't ask the neighbors for updates, I don't replay the last conversation in my head looking for meaning. I let him go. Not because he was undeserving, but because I am finally deserving of peace. Olivia, too, has faded into the background noise of my past. Whatever facade she still holds onto, it's no longer my responsibility to maintain or destroy. Let her fight with shadows. I have light now. Michael and I continue our quiet rhythm. We still don't label what we are. There's no need. Some bonds aren't defined by names or roles. Sometimes we sit in the bookstore long after closing, reading silently across from one another. Once he looked up and said, "You know, this place feels like it was waiting for you." I smiled. Maybe I was waiting for it. He nodded. Or maybe we were waiting for each other. The past doesn't vanish. It lingers, like the scent of oil paint on old canvas, but it no longer defines the room. It's just part of the story, the underpainting beneath something new. I still write. Not to make sense of things anymore, but to celebrate them. Small joys, quiet moments. The way the afternoon light hits the shelves. The smile on a customer's face when they find a book they didn't know they needed. I write not to be heard, but because I have something to say. And that, more than anything, is what freedom looks like to me. They say you can't go back. But maybe we're never meant to. Maybe the point isn't returning to who we were. Maybe it's becoming who we were always meant to be. Once we stop shrinking, stop pleasing, stop waiting for permission to matter. I used to be a woman who gave until she disappeared. Now, I give with boundaries. I love with clarity. I stand with both feet planted in the truth I built for myself.